Okay, so this is a mock paper response to the first exam, component 1 of the new spec, the new A-level media program. And this is component 1, media products, industries and audiences. And the exam itself is 2 hours 15 minutes. Additional materials you'll need. In addition to this paper, you will need to view an audio-visual source for question 1, print-based resource A for use for question 2, and an 8-page answer book. Instructions to candidates. Answer all questions in section A and section B. Use black ink or a ballpoint pen. Do not use gel pen. Do not use correction fluid. Answers to all the questions must be written on the separate answer booklet provided. If you need additional paper, please ask your invigilator and attach the sheet securely to this answer booklet. Write your name, centre number and candidate number in the spaces at the top of all booklets. At the end of the examination, the answer booklet must be handed to the invigilator. You are advised to spend approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes on section A, including the studying the unseen resources, and approximately 45 minutes on section B. You should use relevant theories and relevant subject-specific terminology where appropriate. Question 1 requires an extended response. You will be assessed on the quality of your written response, including the ability to construct and develop a sustained line of reasoning which is coherent, relevant, substantiated and logically structured. Question 3D provides an opportunity to draw together knowledge and understanding from across the full course of study. You will be rewarded for drawing together knowledge and understanding of different areas of the theoretical framework and media contexts. Answer all questions from both sections. Section A. Analysing media language and representation. And this is the question in the representation section. Question 1 is based on the unseen audiovisual source and the WaterAid advertisement you have studied. The audiovisual resource consists of a television advertisement which is part of the Save the Children Most Shocking Second a Day campaign, made in 2014. You will be allowed 1 minute to read question 1. The advertisement will be shown 3 times. First viewing, watch the advertisement. Second viewing, watch the advertisement and make notes. You will then have 5 minutes to make further notes. Third viewing, watch the advertisement and make final notes. Once the third viewing has finished, you should answer question 1. And here's the questions. Question 1. Compare how audiences are positioned by the representations in this Save the Children advertisement and the WaterAid advertisement you have studied. In your answer you must 1. Consider how the representations constructs versions of reality. 2. Consider the similarities and differences in how audiences are positioned by the representations. Make judgments and draw conclusions about how far the representations relate to relevant media contexts. And this is out of 30 marks.
Conditions are set to remain unsettled for most of the week, with persistent and heavy showers expected over the next couple of days. As we move into the weekend,
I see you in the darkness, I see you in the light. I see your eyes shining in through the night. Make me feel like I belong. Don't leave me, won't leave me here all alone. Sunshine on a rainy day makes my soul trip away. Sunshine on a rainy day makes my soul trip away. Sunshine on the rainy day makes my soul trip away. birthday to you. Make a wish. Granny.
Hello.
Have you done your homework?
Adam.
For a general strike.
Ready or not? Here it comes.
Violent clashes with
Live ammunition against...
Deserve to get shot.
Have a nice day, Mum.
air strikes on rebel position.
We are going to stay.
Tapping.
Go.
Heavy fighting in Richmond.
Dad, where are we?
Rebel forces advance.
Happy birthday to you. Make a wish, darling.
And here's my answer to that question. There is a complete contrast in how audiences are positioned by the two ads on an emotional level. 1 mark. In the Save the Children ad, the audiences are positioned to understand what it is like for a child living in a war zone like Syria. Therefore, the ad is very disturbing and only a sociopath wouldn't be moved by it. The constructed representation of reality in the advert is interesting and slightly surreal. It's a what-if scenario played out to the extreme. It puts a little English girl at her birthday at the beginning, and this would be very relatable to the target audience of middle-class white English families. This is clearly the target audience, as one of the adults can clearly be seen reading the Guardian newspaper rather prominently. The newspaper is politically left of centre, so that means they and their readership are typically socially aware liberals with an understanding and empathy for tragedy in the world. The English girl is white, which raises issues of presumption on the advert's part. Why aren't they a black middle-class family, for instance? Do they assume that the audience wouldn't empathise as much with the little girl if she wasn't white? Why aren't the parents reading The Sun, which is technically a more popular newspaper than The Guardian in England? These are unsettling questions that are nonetheless worth posing, but since the selection of representation seems very deliberate in this ad. The rest of the ad is a montage of little scenes which gradually show the little girl getting sad, scared, distressed, emotionally disturbed, then finally a shell of her former self when her next birthday arrives. The narrative suggests that a person's life can be destroyed by war almost in a blink of an eye. The war in Syria is something most people have heard about, but most people are apathetic about it since they probably don't know much about it, myself included. The WaterAid advert is the binary opposite of the Save the Children ad because the advert emphasises the happiness of Africans rather than the representation of starvation and misery most people are used to seeing in charity ads about them. This is very savvy of the producers of the ad because they have realised that the old adverts have been so prevalent for the last few decades that most people have suffered from compassion fatigue from the onslaught of poverty and misery they have seen in such ads and even on the news. The woman featured in this advert is, as one might expect, black. And so again there is a contrast with the Save the Children ad. She is also singing and happy, as are the children around her. But there is an implicit link between their happiness and the water pump they are congregating around. The water itself is shown almost sensually, and so we who might take it for granted are reminded of the fundamental importance it has to people in less developed countries. So in both ads we have contrasting representations of females, which play against the expectations of the audience in terms of their stereotypical representations in the media usually. However, one might raise the issue of why they are both female and not male. Perhaps most people feel more empathy for women than men when they are in distress, much more so if it's a little girl, as in the Save the Children ad. Neither ad really represents reality though, because Save the Children ad is deliberately stylized and expressionistic, whilst the WaterAid advert is also deliberately stylized because everyone looks healthy and happy. An oversimplification at best. In reality, however, this is justified because it is representing an ideal the charity is hoping to make true through charitable donations. In conclusion, the varying levels of realism in both adverts deliberately challenge the assumptions people will make about the representations they expect to see in adverts. However, you could argue that one advert, the Save the Children advert, pricks the conscience of the audience by putting a white little girl through misery, whilst the other deliberately creates a sense of euphoria in the audience by showing other people, perhaps different racially and or economically to themselves, also being happy and content. Psychologically, the advert is proposing a solution to the problem and inviting us to be part of it. By contrast, the Save the Children ad is a polemical plea for financial assistance in trying to find a solution to the illness and death in Syria. It doesn't propose a solution because, even if they have one, it is a lot harder to communicate what would inevitably be a complex solution in such a short advert. And that got the full 30 marks. Media language. Question 2 is based on resource A, the front page of the Sun newspaper, November 2016, and the front page of the Daily Mail newspaper, again November 2016, provided on page 7 and 8 of the resource booklet. Study resource A carefully and use both front pages when answering the question. Question 2. How does media language incorporate viewpoints and ideologies in these front pages of the Sun and the Daily Mail? So let's just break down the question for a sec. So don't be dissuaded from wordy words. Again, some of you in the media class I've never met before. I'm making this before I've met any of you. Some of you I've already taught. Some of you I've never met. So I just can't take for granted what people know and what people don't know. So please don't feel I'm offending anyone by saying any of this. So how does media language incorporate viewpoints and ideologies? Well, let's break that down. So incorporate basically include viewpoints, different points of view, in other words, people's points of view. Ideologies, i.e. how people see the world. All right, ideologies are a way of seeing the world. Okay, people and media texts show the world in a certain way that reflects their views on it. Okay, good. Okay, so it's worth 15 marks, so here is my answer. Both newspapers are conservative and right-wing in their ideologies, but aim themselves at different social classes. The Daily Mail incorporates its middle-class viewpoints and ideologies in its front page in a number of ways. It has an image of the triumphant Trump, pictured after winning the 2016 US election. So the image is actually a positive one, which suggests that the paper either concurs or even admires his politics, which are also conservative like the paper itself. It has a much more sober style and layout than the Sun because its audience considers themselves intelligent and sophisticated. This is reflected in the formal typography, i.e. font, of the written text. By contrast, the Sun is considered a working-class newspaper and seems to be suggesting that Trump winning may be a mistake for the world. It does this by representing Trump in a manner that borrows the comical representation of him as had appeared in satirical cartoon The Simpsons. This is interesting because it seems to assume that its readership needs a pop culture reference in order to understand whom Trump is. Furthermore, the paper is just as right-wing as the Daily Mail, but seems to have an opposing viewpoint. However, the emphasis is on highlighting how The Simpsons had predicted Trump becoming president, not in any particular viewpoint. Juxtaposing cartoon Trump with Homer Simpson saying his catchphrase is just emphasizing that the character Homer Simpson may think Trump winning is a mistake, and not necessarily expressing the viewpoint of the newspaper itself. This reading depends on knowing that "dough" is the character's catchphrase for when things go wrong during the episodes of The Simpsons. Since The Simpsons is a TV show loved across social and political divides all over the world, it is safe to assume the Sun's readers understand the sentiment being expressed, and this is what the newspaper is banking on. In conclusion, both newspapers try to reflect what they feel is the conservative status quo. However, The Daily Mail is more plain in its representation of the event, whilst the Sun is more impressionistic in its representation of that same event. And that got full 15 marks. Boom! Section B. Understanding media industries and audiences. 3A. Briefly explain what is meant by distribution, and this is worth 2 marks. Just as an aside here between me and you, the class, right? If a question's worth only like 2 marks, don't end up writing War and Peace long, responses. It only requires no more than say 3 sentences, 2 if you can. Try and aim for at least 1 sentence per mark offered for a question, but try not to go over the top. Maybe aim for 2 instead. Aim for 2, just settle for 1 per mark. Okay. So again, briefly explain what is meant by distribution. And I wrote, distribution is the method by which media products are accessed by the public. For instance, it's about getting enough prints of a film to cinemas all over the world, or a newspaper to newsagents all over a country. And that was simply all I wrote, because it's only worth 2 marks. 3B. How have recent technological changes had an impact on the production and distribution of newspapers? And this is worth 10 marks, so a more in-depth reply is required for this one. My answer. The production of newspapers is almost entirely digitised now, so the old school printing presses are no longer used, so this keeps costs down on the production side. However, print media such as traditional newspapers bought from shops will no doubt become extinct eventually as digital media takes over completely. More and more people are accessing news from websites on their PCs or on their smartphones because it's convenient and free of charge. Newspapers have tried to monetize this online news with mixed results. Because where one charges, there will certainly be those that don't, and most consumers these days don't have brand loyalty as they once did. Furthermore, the rising price of newspapers is a self-perpetuating problem because the prices rise when circulation drops. Otherwise, the paper loses profit. So with the rise in price, there is at least sometimes a loss in readership because some readers are indignant that something that cost them 20p when they first started reading it is now 50p, so they stop buying it. So every time a newspaper loses significant numbers of readers, the price rises to compensate. And this is not a good long-term strategy when you are up against news online that is free. There are some that feel that newspapers will always be around because they have always been around for centuries. However, with the advent of digital media, the rules have changed completely, so no one can be sure what the future would hold for the survival of newspapers as a medium. And that got the full 10 marks. C. What is a media conglomerate? And this is again worth 1 mark. So again, do not write a novel, in this case a sentence. So I wrote, it is a large company that owns several companies that provide products or services in the media industry. Right? Tight, succinct, answer the question, get that mark, move on. In question 3D, you will be rewarded for drawing together knowledge and understanding from across your full course of study, including different areas of the theoretical framework and media contexts. FYI, theoretical framework just means media theories, and media context means what were the key influences that contributed to the media text being made in the first place. 3D. Explain how ownership shapes media products. Refer to the Daily Mirror to support your points, and this is worth 12 marks. Ownership shapes media products because ownership involves a big company, and usually there is one person in charge of everything overall. This means that the owner's worldviews will inevitably shape the media their company creates. The Mirror has had a number of owners, but overall the paper has always been left-wing and Labour Party supporting. The Daily Mirror was launched on the 2nd of November 1903 by Alfred Hamsworth, later Lord Northcliffe, as a newspaper for women run by women. Hence the name. He said, "I intended it to be really a mirror of feminine life, as well on its grave as on its lighter sides, to be entertaining without being frivolous, and serious without being dull." Ironically, men vastly outnumber women in its readership now. Overall, the ownership has shaped the paper in interesting ways during historical moments. For instance, during the Iraq War of 2003, the Mirror went against the tide of tabloid newspaper opinion in being vocal about their opposition to the war. By contrast, both the Sun and Daily Mail were vocal supporters of that same war. By being in the minority in terms of populist opinion, the Mirror was perversely shaping a niche audience for itself, since those that used to read the Sun or the Mail but disagreed with the war could read the Mirror during this time. In practice, however, it is doubtful this actually happened. Nonetheless, it is clear that the ownership of the Mirror undoubtedly shaped its contrary political stance during the war. In conclusion, ownership fundamentally shapes media products. So much so, in fact, that, at the time of writing this, there is much controversy about Rupert Murdoch, the owner of many media products and companies, trying to buy even more, and thus have more power than any other single person in the media. This is a very scary thought, and that got the full 10 marks. 4A. Explain how national and global audiences can be reached through different media technologies and platforms. Refer to Late Night Woman's Hour to support your points, and this is worth 8 marks. My answer. Given the world-changing nature of the internet, it is easier than ever for media texts to be enjoyed beyond their country of origin. Late Night Women's Hour is indicative of the expansiveness of mass media today, since it can be accessed on multiple media platforms. National audiences can listen to the show on radio, digital or otherwise, as well as the podcast and even uploads to YouTube. Given the worldwide brand recognition of the BBC, as well as the name recognition the show itself has, for instance, it has been guest hosted by people like J.K. Rowling, it is open to everyone on many platforms. People also tweet about the show, with a potential global audience for each one. Radio 4 has steadily grown its audience and listening hours. More recently, the events of 11th of September 2001 undoubtedly boosted audiences to Radio 4, i.e. the Twin Towers attack. In particular, the news programmes, as it did with television news, but this also had a positive effect across the rest of the schedule. In conclusion, Late Night Woman's Hour reaches countries within Britain, but hasn't really impacted beyond the British Isles. However, it is a very successful homegrown product, even though its impact beyond is negligible. Full 8 marks there. B. How do media organisations meet the needs of specialised audiences? Refer to Late Night Woman's Hour to support your points, and this is worth 12 marks. My answer. The historical context of Late Night Woman's Hour is important in addressing this question. It began simply as Woman's Hour, and it was intended for housewives to listen to. However, the name itself is old-fashioned because it was back in a time of rife sexism, and entertainment for women were more or less rationed and confined to the home, which they were expected to run whilst their husband went to work or out socialising. Most of the media, including the radio, was run by men and for men. Today, women are much more equal in society and hold top positions in the world when once they didn't. This has meant the media has diversified as a result. Originally, Woman's Hour was seen as harmless and traditionally addressed stereotypical women's issues, such as making the housekeeping budget stretch further and so on. No doubt men were in control of the conditions in which the programme was produced and broadcasted. Nowadays, this sort of media format and policy would be seen as sexist, and so it no longer has a place in the modern media landscape. However, the media is still predominantly male-orientated, and so there is still a need for a space where women can talk freely about issues that concern them as a gender. So the modern function of the spin-off late-night version of Woman's Hour is for women to be able to talk freely about anything they like unfettered, whether that be sexual matters or gender politics. Modern women do not tend to concern themselves with the same domestic issues that women were expected to by society when the original format was conceived. Because of this modern social context, the programme has reflected that change, the post-feminist liberation, and as a result has since become a niche hit. Niche being a marketing term for something that has a very specific target audience, not to mention becoming somewhat cool for people to listen to. This clearly illustrates that the format has become a long way since its original inception, and that got the full 12 marks. And that is the full exam paper. Exam paper 1, Media Products, Industries and Audiences. So there you go.